The town of Gray Hollow was quiet at night. Not the peaceful kind of quiet people liked. It was the kind that made you feel like the world had paused and forgotten to start again. After midnight, the streets emptied. Lights went off one by one in the houses along Maple Street. Dogs stopped barking. Even the wind seemed to slow down. But there was one thing that always happened. At exactly 2:17 a.m. a train passed through the town. No one ever saw it during the day. No one ever heard about it on the news. And it never stopped. The strange part was that Gray Hollow didn't have a railway station anymore. The tracks were old and rusty, half hidden by weeds and grass. According to the town records, trains stopped running here almost 30 years ago. But every night, the train came. Lucas Turner first heard about it from his grandfather. They were sitting on the small wooden porch behind the house. The summer air smelled like pine trees and warm dust. Crickets chirped somewhere in the tall grass. His grandfather leaned back in the old chair and looked toward the dark tree line. "Do you hear it?" he asked quietly. Lucas tilted his head. At first, there was nothing. Then, a distant, metallic rumble. Very faint, like something heavy rolling far away. Lucas frowned. "Is that thunder?" His grandfather slowly shook his head. "No," he said. "That's the train." Lucas laughed. "There's no train here." His grandfather didn't laugh. Instead, he pointed toward the forest where the old tracks disappeared between the trees. "Listen carefully," he said. The sound grew a little louder. A deep rolling noise. Metal on metal. Lucas suddenly noticed something strange. The sound was too steady, too rhythmic, like wheels turning on rails. His stomach felt a little strange. "But trains don't come here anymore," Lucas said. "That's what everyone says," his grandfather replied. The rumble slowly passed through the valley. For a moment, Lucas thought he saw a faint glow, far away in the trees. Not bright, just a pale moving light. Then the sound faded. The forest went quiet again. The crickets returned. Lucas looked at his grandfather. "What kind of train is it?" His grandfather didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared into the darkness for a long time. Then he said something Lucas never forgot. "That train," he said quietly, "has never stopped here." Lucas was 16 when he decided to see it for himself. Because there was one rule everyone in Gray Hollow seemed to know. No one went near the tracks at 2:17 a.m. Now. 1. Lucas left the house quietly. The wooden floor creaked a little as he stepped toward the back door, but the rest of the house stayed silent. His parents were asleep upstairs. Outside, the night air felt cool and still. Lucas checked the time on his phone. 2:05. 12 minutes. That was enough. He turned on his flashlight and began walking down the narrow dirt path behind the house. The beam of light moved across tall grass and small stones. The forest ahead looked darker than usual. Almost like the trees were standing closer together. Lucas tried not to think about what his grandfather had said years ago. No. One goes near the tracks at 2:17. He told himself it was just an old town story, nothing more. The old railway tracks appeared between the trees. Two thin metal lines stretched into the darkness. Rust covered most of the rails. Grass grew between the wooden boards underneath. Lucas stepped closer. His flashlight revealed spider webs, leaves, and patches of moss. "Yeah," he whispered to himself. "No train uses this." He checked the time again. 2:14 a.m. 3 minutes. Lucas sat down on a large rock beside the tracks. Everything around him was quiet. Too quiet. Even the crickets had stopped. Then, sound. Very faint. Lucas froze. At first, it was barely noticeable. Low vibration in the air. Like a distant engine. The ground under his shoes trembled just a little. Lucas stood up slowly. The sound grew louder. Metal rolling on metal. Just like before. Except now he was much closer. His flashlight shook slightly in his hand. Lucas pointed the beam down the tracks. Nothing. Just darkness between the trees. But the sound kept getting louder. Closer. Then he saw it. Far down the railway, a light. Not a bright modern headlight. This one looked soft and yellow, like an old lantern. It moved slowly toward him. Lucas felt a strange cold feeling run down his arms. The train was coming, and something about it felt wrong. The light grew larger. The rumbling sound filled the forest. Lucas expected to hear a loud horn or screeching brakes, but there was nothing. No whistle. No warning. Just the steady rolling of wheels and the strange yellow light. Then the train emerged from the darkness. Lucas's flashlight beam touched the front of it, and he immediately knew this was not a normal train. The metal looked old. Very old. The surface was dark and worn, like it had been traveling for decades without stopping. The windows were dim. Some of them flickered with faint light. But what really made Lucas step back was this. Inside the windows, he thought he saw people sitting very still. Not moving, not talking, just staring forward. The train passed slowly in front of him. Car after car. Each one the same. Old metal, dim lights, silent passengers. Lucas raised his flashlight toward one of the windows. For a moment, the light revealed a man sitting inside. The man looked pale. His clothes looked like they were from another time. But the strangest thing was his face. The man wasn't looking forward. He was looking directly at Lucas. And then the man slowly raised his hand. And tapped the window. Once. Twice. 3 times. Lucas suddenly noticed something else. The train wasn't slowing down, but the door of one of the cars was slightly open. Just enough to see inside. And as the train passed him, the door slowly began to open wider. Lucas felt a terrible thought appear in his mind, almost like a whisper. You could step inside, and the train still hadn't stopped. The open door moved slowly as the train passed. It didn't swing wide like a normal train door. It opened just a little more, and then stopped. Lucas stood frozen beside the tracks. The wind from the moving train brushed past him, carrying a strange smell. Not smoke, not metal. Something older, like dust from a forgotten place. The yellow lights inside the train flickered softly. For a moment, Lucas thought the train would pass completely, that the door would disappear into the darkness like the rest of the cars. But then something strange happened. The train began to slow down. Not enough to stop, just enough to make the movement feel different. The wheels still rolled along the rails, but the sound changed. The steady rhythm became slower, heavier. Lucas took a small step back. Okay, that's enough, he whispered to himself. He turned his body slightly, ready to walk away. But the door was now directly in front of him. Open. Waiting. Lucas couldn't see the entire inside of the train. The light was dim and yellow, like an old lamp burning somewhere far down the car. The floor inside looked wooden. Old wooden boards, worn smooth by years of footsteps. Rows of seats stretched into the darkness. Most of the passengers sat still. Still. Some looked out the opposite windows. Some looked straight ahead, and a few looked at Lucas. None of them moved. None of them spoke. The only sound was the slow rumbling of the wheels. Lucas told himself, something important. They're just people. Maybe it was some kind of private railway. Maybe the train belonged to a museum or some strange late-night transport line. But another thought appeared immediately. Then why isn't it on any map? And why did no one in town ever talk about it? Lucas lifted his flashlight and pointed it inside. The beam crossed the first row of seats. An old woman sat near the door. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. Her coat looked very old-fashioned. The kind of clothes people wore in black and white photographs. Her face was calm, but her eyes slowly turned toward the light, toward Lucas, for a long moment. Neither of them moved. Lucas suddenly felt something strange. The woman didn't look angry. She didn't look scared. She looked curious, almost like she was surprised to see him. Then Lucas heard something inside the train. Footsteps, slow footsteps coming from deeper inside the car. One of the passengers stood up somewhere beyond the rows of seats. Lucas couldn't see the person clearly, only a shadow moving between the dim lights. The footsteps moved closer. Step. Lucas felt his heart beating faster. The shadow stopped a few rows away from the door. Then the person stepped into the weak yellow light. It was a man wearing a long dark coat. The coat looked worn, like it had been used for many years. The man's face looked normal at first. Just tired. Very tired. But his eyes were strange. They looked unfocused, like he had been looking at the same thing for a very long time. The man looked at Lucas. Not surprised. Not confused. Just calm. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost lost under the sound of the train. "You shouldn't be here." Lucas swallowed. "What is this train?" he asked. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past Lucas, toward the dark forest behind him. As if checking something. Then he looked back. "This train," the man said slowly, "doesn't stop for towns anymore." Lucas frowned. "What does that mean?" The man took one step closer to the door. The dim light made his face look pale. "It only stops," he said, "for people who get on." Lucas felt cold suddenly. "But it didn't stop." The man nodded slightly. "No." Then he pointed at the open door. "That part," he said quietly, "is your choice." Behind him, the other passengers still sat silently. Watching. Waiting. The train continued moving slowly along the tracks. Lucas realized something that made his stomach twist. The train had been passing for several minutes now, but the end of it still hadn't appeared. Car after car continued sliding past the trees. More windows, more silent passengers. The train seemed longer than any normal train. Too long, almost endless. Lucas stepped back from the door. "I'm not getting on," he said quickly. The man studied him carefully. For a moment, Lucas thought he saw something like relief in the man's expression. But then the man said something strange, very strange. "That's good," he said, "because once you enter—" He glanced behind him, down the endless rows of seats. "You don't choose where it goes next." Lucas suddenly noticed something else. The ground beneath his feet wasn't shaking as much anymore. The train was slowly speeding up again. The open door began to move away from him, just a little at first, then a little more. Lucas took another step back from the tracks. The door slowly slid past him. The man inside watched him the entire time, and just before the car disappeared into the darkness, the man spoke one last time. "Next time," he said quietly, "don't come this close." Then the door vanished. More cars passed, more silent windows, more still passengers, and finally, the last car rolled into the darkness of the forest. The rumbling sound faded. The yellow lights disappeared between the trees, and the night became quiet again. Lucas stood alone beside the tracks. The forest slowly filled again with the sound of crickets. He checked the time on his phone. 2:23 a.m. 6 minutes. The train had passed for 6 minutes. Lucas turned to leave, but as he walked away, he couldn't stop thinking about one thing. One detail he had noticed too late. Something small, but very strange. When the man had stepped closer to the door, Lucas had clearly seen the floor of the train and the thick layer of dust covering it. Except for one thing. There were no footprints leading to the door. None at all. Lucas barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the open door of the train again. The dim yellow light, the silent passengers, and the man in the dark coat. Once you enter, you don't choose where it goes next. By morning, Lucas had convinced himself that he needed answers. Gray Hollow had a small public library near the town square. It was one of the oldest buildings in town. The wooden floors creaked, and the shelves were filled with dusty books that no one had touched in years. Lucas pushed open the door around noon. A small bell rang softly above him. Behind the front desk sat Mrs. Daly, the town librarian. She looked up from her book. "Well, good morning, Lucas," she said with a warm smile. "What brings you here?" Lucas hesitated. "I'm looking for something about the old railway." Mrs. Daly raised an eyebrow. "The railway?" she repeated. "That hasn't been used in decades." "I know," Lucas said quickly. "I just want to read about it." Mrs. Daly studied him for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "You might find something in the archives downstairs." The basement of the library smelled like old paper and dust. Rows of metal cabinets lined the walls. Each one was filled with folders, newspapers, and town records. Lucas switched on a small desk lamp. The yellow light spread across the table. He began searching. Old railway maps, construction records, town meeting notes, most of it was boring, until he found a newspaper. The paper looked very old. The edges were slightly torn, and the ink had faded. The date at the top read, October 14th, 1973. Lucas leaned closer and read the headline. Local train line closed after strange INCID hints. Heartbeat a little faster. The article explained that the railway line passing through Gray Hollow had officially shut down that year. According to the report, there had been several unusual events involving the late-night train. Passengers claimed the train had missed scheduled stops. Some said the train had arrived hours later than expected. Others said something even stranger. A few passengers had boarded the train in Gray Hollow, but never arrived at their destination. Lucas felt a chill run down his back. He turned the page. There was a photograph printed near the bottom, a black and white picture of the old train station. People stood near the platform. A train sat on the tracks behind them. It looked very similar to the one Lucas had seen the night before. Old metal, rounded windows, dim lights. Lucas leaned closer to the photograph. There were maybe 15 people standing in the picture. Railway workers, passengers, and one young man standing near the edge of the platform. Lucas stared at him. Something about the man looked familiar. Very familiar. Lucas moved the newspaper closer to the lamp. The man in the photo wore a long dark coat. His face looked serious. Tired. Lucas, single quotes, stomach tightened. He had seen that face before, just hours earlier. Standing inside the train. It was the same man. Lucas quickly read the small caption under the photograph. Passengers waiting for the final evening train before the line's closure. Below that was a list of names. Lucas scanned them. Then he saw it. Daniel Mercer. Missing. Lucas leaned back in the chair. Missing. The article continued below. It explained that Daniel Mercer had boarded the final train leaving Gray Hollow that night, but he had never arrived at the next station. The railway company searched the train. They checked every car, every seat, but Daniel Mercer was gone. No one knew where he had disappeared. Lucas slowly looked back at the photograph. At the young man in the dark coat. The same man who had spoken to him inside the train. That didn't make sense. The newspaper was from 1973. More than 50 years ago. Lucas suddenly noticed something else. Something that made his chest tighten. At the bottom of the article was one final line. A short sentence the reporter had added, almost like a warning. Following this incident, the 2:17 night train service was permanently discontinued. Lucas looked at the time on his phone. 2:02 p.m. Then he looked again at the photograph. At the man in the coat. The man who had told him not to come near the tracks. Lucas whispered quietly to himself, But the train never stopped. And suddenly a new thought appeared in his mind, a disturbing one. If Daniel Mercer had boarded the train in 1973, and Lucas had seen him inside the train last night, then the train had been traveling for over 50 years. Without ever stopping, Lucas left the library slowly. The afternoon sun felt strangely bright after the dim basement. People walked across the town square, talking, laughing, living their normal lives. No one looked worried. No one seemed to know that a train passed through Gray Hollow every night at 2:17 a.m. A train that wasn't supposed to exist. A train that had been traveling for more than 50 years. And inside it, passengers who never arrived anywhere. Lucas couldn't stop thinking about Daniel Mercer, the man in the photograph. The same man who had stood near the open door of the train. The same man who had warned him, "Next time, don't come this close." But Lucas knew something now that he hadn't known the night before. Daniel Mercer wasn't just a passenger. He had been missing since 1973. That night, Lucas waited again. His parents went to bed around 11. The house grew quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Slowly. Lucas watched the time on his phone. 1:58 a.m., 2:05 a.m., 2:12 a.m. His heart began beating faster. He grabbed his flashlight and left the house. The night air was colder than before. Clouds covered the moon, making the forest darker than usual. Lucas walked the same path behind the house. Every step felt heavier, like the forest itself knew where he was going. Soon the old railway tracks appeared again between the trees. Silent. Rusty. Forgotten. Lucas stood a few meters away from them. This time, he remembered the man's warning. Don't come this close. So he stayed. Back. The forest became quiet. The crickets stopped again. Lucas checked the time. 2:16 a.m. Then the sound returned. The low metallic rumble rolling through the darkness. Lucas felt the ground tremble slightly beneath his shoes. The train was coming again. The yellow light appeared between the trees, moving slowly along the tracks. Lucas held his breath. The old train emerged from the darkness exactly like before. Silent. Heavy. Endless. Car after car passed by. Dim. Lights glowing in the windows. Passengers sitting quietly inside, watching nothing, moving nowhere. Lucas looked carefully at the windows. Some passengers looked like normal people. Some looked very old. Some wore clothes from different decades. A man in a suit from the 1960s. A corner of the 1960s. Woman in clothes that looked even older. Each one sitting silently. Waiting. Then Lucas saw him again. Daniel Mercer, standing inside one of the cars near the door. The door was closed this time. Daniel looked out the window. His eyes searched the darkness until they found Lucas standing near the trees. For a moment, his expression changed. Not surprised. Recognition. The train slowed again, slightly as it passed. Not stopping, never stopping, but slow enough that Lucas could clearly see Daniel through the glass. Daniel stepped closer to the window. Then he did something Lucas didn't expect. He shook his head. Slowly. As if saying, "No." Lucas stepped closer to the tracks without thinking. "Why?" he shouted. His voice sounded small against the rumbling train. "Why can't you leave?" Daniel looked at him carefully. Then he lifted one hand and pointed inside the train. Behind him, down the long row of seats. Lucas followed the direction of his finger. For the first time, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Every passenger was facing forward. Looking toward the front of the train, watching something. Lucas couldn't see. Daniel spoke. His voice was faint through the glass, but Lucas understood the words. "We thought it was just a normal trip." He paused. Then he continued. But the train never reached the next station. Lucas felt a cold chill run through him. Daniel looked tired, more tired than any person Lucas had ever seen. "We kept waiting," Daniel said, "for the train to stop. He glanced down the endless rows of seats, but it never did. Lucas looked along the train again. More cars, more windows, more silent passengers. The train seemed impossibly long, like it could continue forever. Daniel leaned closer to the glass dot. His voice was softer. Now, every night it passes towns. Every night someone stands near the tracks. He looked directly at Lucas, and sometimes someone gets on. Lucas felt his stomach drop. What happens if they do? He asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the front of the train again, toward the place. None of the passengers could see clearly. Then he looked back. They take a seat. The train began to speed up again. The wheels rolled faster along the rails. The car carrying Daniel started to move past. Lucas. Daniel spoke one final time, his voice almost lost in the rumble of the train. As long as the train finds new passengers, it never needs to stop. The car disappeared into the darkness. More cars passed, then more. And finally, the last car rolled past the trees. The rumbling faded. The yellow lights vanished. The forest became quiet again. Lucas stood alone beside the tracks. The crickets slowly returned. The wind moved gently through the trees. The railway looked old and empty again, like nothing had passed there at all. Lucas slowly stepped away from the tracks, and this time he didn't look back. But every night at 2:17 a.m., the train still passes through gray, hollow, silent, endless, never stopping.